Gun violence in the United States is an intensely debated political issue. Gun violence is most common in poor urban areas and in conjunction with gang violence, often involving juveniles and young adults. Gun violence is not new in the United States, with the assassinations of presidents such as Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. High-profile gun violence incidents such as the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy and more recently the Columbine High School massacre, the Virginia Tech massacre, and the 2011 Tucson shooting have fueled debate over gun policies. There were 52,447 deliberate and 23,237 accidental non-fatal gunshot injuries in the United States during the year 2000. The majority of gun-related deaths in the United States are suicides, with 17,352, which is 55.6% of the total 31,224 firearm-related deaths in 2007 due to suicide, while 12,632, or 40.5%, were homicide deaths. Policies at the federal, state, and local levels have attempted to address gun violence through a variety of methods, including restricting firearms purchased by youths and other at-risk populations, setting waiting periods for firearm purchases, establishing gun buyback programs, targeted law enforcement and policy strategies, stiff sentencing of gun law violators, education programs for parents and children, and community outreach programs. Gun policy are also highly influenced by debates over the interpretation of the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, and in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court took a position for the first time on this issue in the District of Columbia versus Heller case, holding that the Second Amendment secures an individual right to own firearms. Hello, my name is Stephanie Lauren, and I am a family member of a victim who was killed due to gun violence. I believe that the wrong hands are being allowed to have guns, so therefore I believe that there should be stronger laws and restrictions placed in order to own or carry a gun. And after I have spoken to you, I hope to persuade you to feel the same way too. Suicides make up the majority of gun-related deaths in the United States, which, as I stated earlier, makes up a little over half of the deaths compared to homicides. Some research shows an association between household firearm ownership and gun suicide rates. During the 1980s and early 1990s, there was a strong upward trend in adolescent suicides with a gun, as well as sharp overall increase in suicides among those aged 75 and over. In the United States, firearms remain the most common method of suicide, accounting for 50.7% of all suicides committed during 2006. Homicides make up 40.5% of gun-related deaths. While people during the 19th century were concerned with violent crime, it often took the form of riots and other forms of disorder in cities. Gun violence, however, sometimes played a role in these riots. Homicide rates in these cities were significantly lower than in modern times. During the 1980s and early 1990s, homicide rates surged in cities across the United States. Handgun homicides accounted for nearly all the overall increase in the homicide rate from 1985 to 1993. The rising trend in homicide rates during the 1980s and early 1990s was most pronounced among youths and Hispanic and African American males in the United States, with the injury and death rates tripling for black males aged 13 through 17 and doubling for black males aged 18 through 24. The rise in crack cocaine use in cities across the United States is often cited as a factor for increased gun violence among youths during this time period. Gun-related homicide rates in the United States are 20 to 35% times higher than they are in countries that are economically and politically similar to it. Higher rates are found in developing countries and those with political instability. Prevalence of homicide and violent crime is greatest in urban areas in the United States. In metropolitan areas, the homicide rate in 2005 was 6.1 per 100,000 compared with 3.5 in non-metropolitan counties. In U.S. cities with populations greater than 250,000, the mean homicide rate was 12.1 per 100,000. In 2005, 75% of the 110,100 homicides committed using firearms in the United States were committed using handguns, compared to 4% with rifles, 5% with shotguns, and the rest with a type of firearm not specified. Due to the lethal potential that a gun brings to a situation, the likelihood that a death will result is significantly increased when either the victim or the attacker has a firearm. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 7,606 people were killed in workplace homicides from 1997 to 2008, an average of about 684 per year. In 2008, the most recent year for which detailed information is available, 526 people were killed in workplace homicides, 80% of which were in shootings. In 30 incidents that year, multiple people were killed. In 12% of those incidents, the shooter was a co-worker or a former co-worker. In the United States, a quarter of commercial robberies are committed with guns. Robberies committed with guns are 3 times as likely to result in fatalities compared with robberies where other weapons were used, with similar patterns in cases of family violence. Criminologists hypothesize that if guns were less available, criminals may likely commit the crime anyway, but with less lethal weapons. They have found that the level of gun ownership in the 50 largest U.S. cities correlates with the rate of robberies committed with guns, but not overall robbery rates. A significant number of homicides result as a byproduct of another violent crime which escalates, with the offender going into the crime without a clear or sustained intent to kill or be killed. Public policy as related to preventing gun violence is an ongoing political and social debate regarding both the restriction and availability of firearms within the United States. Policy at the federal level is and has been governed by the Second Amendment, National Firearms Act, Gun Control Act of 1968, Firearm Owners Protection Act, Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, and the Domestic Violence Offender Act. Gun policy in the United States has been revised many times with acts such as the Firearm Owners Protection Act, which loosened provisions for gun sales while also strengthening automatic firearms law. Gun control proponents often cite that the relatively high number of homicides committed with firearms as reason to support stricter gun control laws. Firearm laws are a subject of great debate in the United States, with firearms also widely used for recreational purposes and for personal protection. Gun rights advocates cite that the use of firearms for self-protection and to deter violent crime as reasons why more guns can reduce crime. Gun rights advocates also say criminals are the least likely to obey firearm laws, and so limiting access to guns by law-abiding people make them more vulnerable to armed criminals. The first federal legislation related to firearms was the Second Amendment ratified in 1791. For 143 years, this was the only major federal legislation regarding firearms. The next federal firearm legislation was the National Firearms Act of 1934. The Act created regulations for the sale of firearms, established taxes on their sale, and required registration of some types of firearms, such as machine guns. In the aftermath of the Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinations, the Gun Control Act of 1968 was enacted. This act regulated gun commerce, restricting mail-order sales, and allowing shipments only to licensed firearm dealers. The act also prohibited felons, those under indictment, fugitives, illegal aliens, drug users, those dishonorably discharged from the military, and those in mental institutions from owning guns. The Firearm Owners Protection Act was passed in 1986. It changed some restrictions in the 1968 Act, allowing federally licensed gun dealers to require background checks. The 1986 Act also restricted the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms from gun dealers, as well as individual unlicensed private sellers, to sell at gun shows, while continuing to require conductive repetitive inspections, reduced the amount of record keeping required on gun dealers, raised the burden of proof for convicting gun law violators, and changed restrictions on convicted felons from owning firearms. In the years following the passage of the Gun Control Act in 1968, people buying guns were required to show identification and sign a statement affirming that they were not in any of the prohibited categories. Many states enacted background check laws that went beyond the federal requirements. The Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, passed by Congress in 1993, imposed a waiting period before the purchasing of a handgun, allowing a background check. The Brady Act also required the establishment of a national system to provide instant criminal background checks, with checks to be done by firearms dealers. The Brady Act only applied to people who bought guns from licensed dealers, whereas the most felons buy guns from a black market. Child Access Prevention Laws, or CAP laws, enacted by many states, require parents to store firearms safely to minimize access by children to guns, while maintaining ease of access by adults. CAP laws hold gun owners liable should a child gain access to a loaded gun that is not properly stored. Statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention show that on average, one child died every 3 days in accidental instances in the United States from 2000 to 2005. In most states, CAP law violations are considered misdemeanors. Research indicates that CAP laws are correlated with a reduction in unintentional gun deaths by 23% and gun suicides among those aged 14 through 17 by 11%. The National Bureau of Economic Research has found that CAP laws are correlated with a reduction of non-fatal gun injuries among both children and adults by 30 to 40%. Research also indicates that CAP laws are most highly correlated with reductions in non-fatal gun injuries in states where violations are considered felonies, whereas in states that consider violations as misdemeanors, the potential impact of CAP laws is not statistically significant. Some local jurisdictions in the United States have more restrictive laws, such as Washington, D.C.'s Firearms Control Regulations Act of 1975, which banned residents from owning handguns and required permitted firearms be disassembled and locked with a trigger lock. Violence prevention and educational programs have been established in many schools and communities across the United States. These programs aim to change personal behavior of both children and their parents, encouraging children to stay away from guns, ensure parents store guns safely, encourage children to solve disputes without resorting to violence. The more effort required of people, the more difficult it is to implement a preventive strategy. Preventive strategies focused on modifying the situational environment and the firearm itself may be more effective. Gun buyback programs are also a strategy aimed at influencing the firearms market by taking guns off the streets. Gun buyback programs have been shown to be ineffective, with the National Academy of Sciences citing theory underlying these programs as badly flawed. Guns surrendered tend to be those least likely to be involved in a crime, such as old malfunctioning guns with little resale value. So, after speaking about all these facts and statistics, I don't know about you, but I am really appalled. I believe that with all the gun laws there are today, it should be difficult to purchase or carry a gun. Because I believe that if a psychological background check would have been added to the criminal background check of the man who shot and killed my fiance, I believe Bill would be alive today. I hope that after listening about gun violence will change your mind about who should have or carry a gun. Thank you.